Ṣẹ̀kẹ̀rẹ̀ lọ bá jó, ṣẹ̀kẹ̀rẹ̀ lọ bá jó, olúwa mi ò dìde ojú ṣẹ̀kẹ̀rẹ̀.
The Ashen Forge.
Hello and welcome to the Ashen Forge. I am Phantom X, joined as always by Diggs and the legendary Neurotoxin, and a very special guest whom you're all probably here to see, not us, Steven Sharif. How you doing?
I am doing great. I am excited. I think this is my fourth time with you guys. I can't believe our first time was what, back in like 2017? Was it 2017 and 2018?
One or the other. I think 18.
I think it was 2018.
Yeah.
2018. My goodness, where has time gone? 6 years passed, and now we're coming up on A2, and we're back with the same old crew talking about it.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. This is it. 5 days away. Feel the excitement. I'm sure you have been, Steven. I'm sure the office has been rather bustling with work and activity as things have been going on with the spot testing, which, man, that from when spot testing started, when I first got in to where it's at now, night and day difference. In fact, you can even have a night and day difference. That was one of the things they fixed.
That was one of the things that we fixed. Actually, we just made an attunement, I think, to the amount of night and day. But just by the way, just to clarify, for everyone watching, I am de facto releasing the verbal NDA on this meeting for us to discuss so that you guys can ask relevant questions to the testing that you've most recently been a part of. And yeah, night and day is something that we're tuning a little bit. As you know, when testing began, it was just permanently night, like at all times. And then we had some issues with the transition, but we got that fixed. Gabe did a great amount of work on that, as did Mitch, on the time scaler for in world, and now the lighting is looking much better.
Yep, no more constant blindness, neither from being completely too dark or being flash boned.
Yes,
so much better.
That lumen can definitely do a flashbang.
Yeah, I mean, there's an ability to be had there for sure, I would imagine, but maybe not at this stage.
Yeah, so for those of you who are new to us, we've been doing this for 7 years with covering Ashes of Creation, 10 years total. And yes, we are blessed to have had Steven on 4 times now. So we do ramble. We try not to ramble. So this is more of a conversation rather than just like a point-by-point interview. But yeah, we also recognize...
question. To finish your statement, but I have a quick
question. I was also going to say, we also recognize that we are 5 days away, believe it or not, from Alpha 2, and it's kind of hard to find questions to ask you when we know everyone's going to see everything in 5 days. So just throwing that out there.
Well, my question is, and we touched on this a little bit before the camera started rolling, is Alpha 2 is just 5 days away, which means there's crunch, and we are always concerned about Steven's health and like getting good, proper sleep. Is an Extra Life also coming up?
Oh, that is a great question. Extra Life is definitely something that's a little bit on the back burner right now, but my intent is that we are doing Extra Life. So right now I'm a little underwater on everything Alpha 2 related and testing related and the work and bug triaging that's happening. So I haven't checked in with community on the plans for Extra Life, and I haven't seen any communication that's gone out about it. But I was just thinking about that yesterday, literally, and that my first thing Monday morning is to talk about Extra Life with community and what the plans are. So my goal is, yes, we're doing Extra Life this year. I don't want to break that trend.
That's going to be interesting just in terms of sleep. Sleep is your friend. Remember to spend some time with your friend's sleep.
I know. Sleep and I have had a very tumultuous relationship over the years, as a friendship goes. And right now, definitely not the best quote unquote bedfellows.
Well,
Mhm.
that being said, I definitely have noticed that over the past few months and during the live streams and such, your coughing has gone down significantly, and that was something that had been like on the bingo cards and stuff. It's like, oh, how many times is Steven gonna cough? And it's like, you know what? You seem like you've been starting to do something to treat yourself better, whether you change from Coca-Cola to Pepsi or decaf to regular
Well,
coffee or
actually,
whatever.
I don't talk about it much, but actually, it was one of the medications that I was on,
Ah,
which was a beta blocker, has for years caused that cough. And they switched my medication about 6 months ago to something else. So I think that got rid of the cough.
thank goodness.
Yeah.
For something like that, it's something you know you need, but there's other versions of it. And so I'm glad that things have been going better with that. It's really good that because I know a lot of people are like, "What's going on with Steven? Is he okay?"
Oh, I'm okay. I'm a solid dude. I'm here for the long haul. It's going to take more than a few bugs to knock me out.
That is good to hear. I'm glad to hear that.
So we're like I said, 5 days away. I'm curious, when as you're getting closer and closer and closer, what is is there anything you're particularly nervous about? Like anything that you worry, the 25th gets here. What are you most worried about, like that might happen or not happen?
Well, I think, if you talk about like, risk assessments, and we do this exercise quite regularly within the studio, what is our what is our kind of worst case scenario? Obviously, is that servers fall over on day one, right? And we have unexpected issues that we're hitting when we scale up to 100,000 testers as opposed to what we have right now, scale wise within Alpha 2. So within the Alpha 2 pretesting. So we're trying to get ahead of that. We have a lot of logging in place. Um, when I think about what am I most worried about for Alpha 2, I think messaging is a very important thing to manage expectations on, right? We've broken out Alpha 2 into the phases that we talked about, which primarily has to do with when certain features and content comes online as we move through phase 1, 2, and 3. And there is something to be said for the exposure that we as a project have within the community. We have our very core audience, which is very familiar with where the project is at, with our expectations message that we're trying to communicate to them. And then we have the very broad audience beyond that, which is unfamiliar with any of that stuff, and they're going to see Ashes, for some of them the first time, for some of them the second or third time, but they're relatively disconnected to what our open development means and what an alpha is. And they're accustomed to seeing, the term alpha be relatable to a port over from a launched and completed game, which is a very, very different experience than what we're talking about with our alpha. And ours is more intended to engage the player audience as testers so that we can collect the necessary feedback to ensure the content we're going to mass produce when we move forward to future phases is the content we want to produce and that the players want to have. So, obviously, biggest concern is going to be how do we ensure that that message gets translated not just from our core audience, but to the extendable audience as well, and that their expectation is, okay, this is a test realm where in phase 1, we're establishing these core systems from a stability and a performance perspective.
Yeah, since we don't have NDA, I mentioned this a lot during Node Wars. Your team's ability to sort of take back feedback, take back all the information they got from us testing, and kind of iterate quickly week to week was really impressive. Being in these spot tests is very much the same. When you started the PTR, I was sort of like, oh, that's kind of strange having a PTR in Alpha 2. I 100% see the value of it at this point, the builds that kind of come across. and just that ability to sort of iterate over feedback and server stability. You know, I'm sure there will be a lot of crashes and things like that happen from time to time, but you know, I have still felt very assured by your team, so that's been a great experience.
You know, so funny enough, we actually had a PTR in Alpha 1 as well. We didn't call it a PTR then. I kind of coined a term called Prod B. So if you're in any kind of software development or software release trains, you know that generally it's not acceptable to test things on production environments, right? Like when something goes to production, it should have been tested down on QA first and dev smoke testing, and then it goes to staging, and then eventually it makes its way to a production environment. And that's generally the release train for software development to ensure quality assurance. But there are specific systems that need to get tested quickly by scale, and the scale testing that we have that's automated or bot focused internally doesn't always accurately reflect the types of things that players will do in certain environments. And so instead of inviting players down on our internal environments lower in the train, what we wanted to do was say, let's stand up a second production environment where we are more willing to test things live than we would be on the production branch. And so that's where the PTR became relevant, because obviously it has a separate database. It's not going to mess with the production persistence and characters that you might have on production if things go haywire and a rollback or reset is necessary. And so we decided to stand up PTR a little bit earlier than we would have normally expected to do so, because it provided us a benefit to live test.
Is the curious? I don't know if you can answer this. Is the current PTR what might get released Friday?
So generally the train's always moving, and what that means is when something makes it to the PTR, the next step from there is production. Now we will hotfix straight to the PTR environment, which is called staging for us, as we identify things during the player testing, and then those hotfixes will get captured when we promote that build off of the PTR branch up to the production environment. So yes, what you see on PTR will eventually make its way to production, albeit with some likely hotfixes that comes along the way.
Okay, sorry guys, not trying to take up all the time. Y'all go ahead and jump in.
And I apologize. Sometimes when I don't generally get this technical and conversation about development stuff. I'm happy to do it. I know that for a lot of people, it's just not interesting because they're not software developers. But I'm happy to answer the questions if you talk about them. Generally, this isn't what I do on stream, but it's your show, so you tell me what you want to talk about.
We've got content developers here, so that's when we wouldn't know either, right? We're normally talking about this kind of stuff.
It is definitely a thing that it's the actual development of games is often foreign to people who haven't ever worked in game development. So while you're saying things to me that totally make sense, and like when I was on Neopets and Pet Park, for example, yeah, we definitely had the different branches and we had to test them thoroughly, be hammering every mini game every time, make sure everything's working, pull the other producers in. All right, let's do some multiplayer. I smoked you on this mini game again. But that was definitely an important sort of part to making sure things were released in the right stages, so we wouldn't be exposing the players to bugs, especially for like a kids game where they don't necessarily fully understand. And yeah, exactly. And so it's got to be that much more solid.
Mommy, why is my character naked?
Yeah. Well, speaking of naked, that character creator with the naked Kalar ladies, that one was hilarious, because the version that I had found was that you could get the like a double loincloth thing going on the Vec, where they'd have their normal loincloth, but then you just tweak the settings in the right way and they'd have like this extra crotch flap that had like a hole in it, because that's where the two interpenetrated. So it's like, that's a really weird aesthetic going on there. I know it's a bug.
I think we also had some NPCs about 3 or 4 weeks ago that somehow had lost their clothing.
Oh no.
And on the clothing that was on the end, some of the NPCs that had lost their clothing, for some reason they had nipples, and they were they were like female NPCs. They were completely buck naked, and we're like, oh my god, what is happening? First, back to the character model, remove the nipples so that if they ever get naked again in the future, it's like a mannequin look instead of something a little bit more R-rated.
Yes, a Barbie doll instead of a yeah, I because I know there had been some of that going on in the character creator, but I guess those versions and the NPC models had been different in some way. No, that's
Because I remember
hilarious.
sliders. I
like
remember
some
nipple
people in
sliders.
I like some people in chat are saying, we want nipples, free the nipples.
Well, I know you don't like modding in the game, but like that was one of the first things for any like first person shooter or story game out there. The first mod you could always download was the nudie patch.
Oh no.
Like I'm talking about like in the 90s now, not maybe still these days, but definitely back then. It was like looking for mods for like Wolfenstein.
I think they have a
Not
whole section on Steam for those types of games.
Oh yeah, I'm sure they do at this point. Even had gosh, a game that didn't actually have anything that was too inappropriate. We had gotten flagged because if you read everything on the ESRB stuff and you fill it out as it is, the game got rated as mature content. No, Death with Enforcers does not have mature content. Those are pixelated boobies on one level. It's just for the boss battle. Ain't no biggie.
Very important to have the pixelated boobies in the boss battle. It's a key mechanic.
Speaking
It
of
was
speaking of
yeah.
speaking of character creator, there was a question about character creator being released. Didn't we used to think maybe it was going to happen before A2?
We did.
Is that on the schedule somewhere?
We used to hope that that was going to land, and then as things change and develop, and as they often do, predicated on obviously the most emergent priority issues and bugs that the team needs to work on, that got pushed down the road in order to solve our more Sev 0 and Sev 1 bugs that we were seeing as a result of testing in preparation for A2's launch. So, yes, that did get pushed. We talked about that in the past. I'm not sure when exactly that's going to come online yet. We are still very much in the test and react phase. We are all Kanban right now, or Kanban, as some people would say, and trying to react to the most prevalent and severity issue bugs.
So a lot of folks have been asking this too. They're curious. So the release time. So on Friday, do you all have a time when you think the game will be ready to go? And then also for the week, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say we will be announcing that this week. There will be an announce of the intended initial server realm launch names so that people can plan a little bit around that. And then we will also have obviously some communication around when Alpha 2 on the 25th will start.
Yeah, there's a lot of people asking about server names. Yeah, I think they're all trying to plan their guild launch areas. So,
and then the download, I see Grumpy Guy. Download will be probably sent out, I would imagine, early on Thursday in an email to any Alpha 2 users, and then will be available on the website as well.
Gotcha.
There's been another one that sort of popped up around, and that is the current guild cap being 30, and whether or not that could be increased to 50 at the start, or if that's just something that's not really, I guess, a concern right now.
Yeah, I mean, the thing to think about, so anytime we ask those types of questions, the first thing to think about is like, what's the long-term intent of the system, right? And the long-term intent might not have all the pieces available right now to realize that the goals that we're trying to make. So then we have to ask ourselves the question of, should we be tuning or changing systems today to facilitate a better gameplay experience with what we have available in Alpha 2? Or should we keep the systems built for the long-term intent that will eventually come online in the way we want it to, right? And so that's always a balance that we have to kind of strike. How do we make certain easy variable adjustments to some of the design elements today so that the game experience is a little bit more representative of the long-term intended loops, and that we can collect the appropriate feedback for that? Or do some systems we keep in place the long-term design implications, even though all the pieces aren't there right now? And that, I believe, is one of those things that we might be able to make some simple adjustments now and then change back later when the rest of the system comes online. So we're just right now the design team is kind of focused on other bugs that are more critical than tuning the number of participants in a starting guild.
Yeah, I think we can see that in a few places. Some of the things that come to mind, like the power gains right now between levels, seems kind of pretty pronounced as you get higher. There's the differences, but I assume that's one of those things that, over time you'll just you can tweak a few numbers and it gets better.
That is absolutely one of the primary reasons for Alpha 2, which is to start collecting the tunable feedback along, game balance questions, right? When you talk about the power steps that occur either between, new gear acquisitions or new levels or new ability acquisition, what is our objective? What are we trying to achieve there to begin with first? Is that the player experiences a noticeable difference along that path of progression. And I think we've struck that to some degree, right? Both with the gear acquisition as well as the leveling curve. And then we're going to continue to fine tune that as we collect appropriate business intelligence, the data, the metrics that are what players are doing, as well as the sentiment.
Well, speaking of leveling curve, Paz is throwing out this question about leveling speed. Some people have. There's one specific to leveling speed in Alpha 2, and I think they think it's kind of grindy. And then there's a more general one about, release. And my concern, just throwing it out there about leveling speed, is not end game, time to end game. It's about that interval in between levels. So maybe you could talk a little bit about your philosophy on leveling speed, how it relates to end game, and maybe also how it relates to in between levels. People who have played Lineage 2 seem to want to have a super long, grindy leveling experience, but I don't know what that was like in Lineage 2.
Well, I don't know that it's just delegated to L2. I think that, first and foremost, I think that what we're accustomed to as an MMORPG population today is that everything is a rush to endgame, right? And part of that philosophy or reason we see that is because a lot of the MMOs that people play today are legacy titles that have been around for many, many years. And a lot of the early introductory content is no longer the relevant space where social engagement occurs. And they want to quickly advance the player to the population location, which is at endgame or higher level, and the most recent expansion or whatever. So I would say first to provide context, this isn't a novel idea. A lot of older school games had, much longer leveling curves than what we see today with modern games. First and foremost. Now, whether or not a game, I think, is more grindy, meaning takes longer to level through to level cap than shorter. In my opinion, that is somewhat of a subjective philosophy, right? This is going to be unique to the players. We know this because there's different player groups that prefer one or the other. And my opinion is that we have these core tenets. And one of those core tenets is this concept of risk versus reward. And time in and of itself is intrinsically a risk and a reward, right? It's something you pay and it's a benefit you can get depending on your build. So my opinion is generally that first and foremost, for testing, we want players to play through the experience as is intended for the game, right? And this goes back to harken about, well, we don't have a lot of content to accompany the players right now as we would intend to have later in the game's life, right? Phase 3 of Alpha 2. So should we speed up the leveling process now as a result of that? This is kind of like what changes do we make to the designs now to facilitate a better gameplay experience versus what is the long-term intended gameplay experience? My opinion is that when we would want to speed up player testing, we do that on the PTR. If we need to test a particular system, we can make adjustments there. We can say log in. We're gonna add a modifier bonus to experience gain so that we level up everybody, or we're gonna put in a vendor that has experience scrolls to get you to a specific level. We've actually done that as part of pre-A2 testing. You'll remember that on many occasions we put in vendors that had experience scrolls, and we said, hey, all of you testers, grab this first because we need you to be at this level to test, and then we're going to wipe afterwards. So in that sense, we do have acute testing around things that we want the players to be leveled quickly for. The intended experience for Alpha 2 as a whole, however, is to collect the proper feedback around this concept of grind and how players in our community respond to that grinding experience or that longer than normal leveling process.
Wait.
Yeah.
My question is,
Yeah.
what's longer? What is longer? So because 225 hours to level 50 sounds reasonable. It does not sound particularly long. So longer than 225 hours seems long to me.
Yeah, I think
50.
right now our intent is around 225 to level 50, right? We've expressed that in the past. We're
Right.
going to validate that intent with some of the leveling experience that we see in Alpha 2, right? Along the way, we're going to validate that. We're going to collect player feedback and sentiment around that. And that is something that's going to tell us what is the threshold of our community's comfortability with that amount of time, right?
But it seems to me also that there's other things, even after you get to level 50, there's other progression paths that will take up time, right? There's many progression paths, artisan, social org,
Yeah, absolutely.
naval, right? So it's not just about just getting to level 50 does not get you to end game in
Right. And
Ashes of Creation.
those progression paths that you talked about that are other than the adventuring level, like some of them are uncapped, meaning that they're predicated on other player behaviors and activities that could either set back or advance progression in those realms, right? And then players can also switch out of these progression paths because they're exclusive, such as social organizations, religions, and node citizenships. Like those all have progression paths as well, but
Yeah.
you can opt out and join someone else and redo that progression path per se because of either other benefits. So when we talk about, time to level, really it's a misnomer because it's time to level your adventuring class.
Exactly.
And there are other paths of progression that we intend players to engage with, depending on how that interfaces with their overarching, leveling design for their character, what their goals are.
Right. Right. So there's extra time. It's not just 225 hours to end game. It's 225 hours to one specific path, but there's other progression paths.
To level 50
Right.
adventuring level. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. It's kind of a funny thing.
I'm sorry, just to be clear, I just want to be very clear. 225 hours is in reference to level 50.
Mm-hmm.
Level 25 right now, Alpha 2 Phase 1 will be starting with level 25. And it is roughly 100 hours of gameplay in order to reach level 25.
Right.
Yeah, there's some folks in chat confused about that.
The thing that I kind of think about with the whole journey versus destination sort of thing, I've been in a D&D campaign for like 7 years now. Only level 12. We're in the final zone. Doesn't even matter that we're not max level because the challenge is paced for where we're at and what we're doing. And so I kind of think that, there's a lot with narrative that's going to really help with the whole journey thing being enjoyable and entertaining and making people not even think about the destination as much because there's so much to be enjoyed and appreciated along the way. And so with that, I kind of wanted to ask a little bit about narrative. There's a lot that we've gotten to see, little dynamic event sort of things that will pop up during gameplay. a lot of little things you can do here and there. The different types of commissions can send you this way and that. There's dungeons and other points of interest to access. So, I gotta ask, like, how far along are you folks with your narrative tools and your I guess story engine, your ability to have like all the narrative systems kind of up and running and interfacing with each other and working between the nodes, all
So
that sort of stuff.
we have a number of different tools that relate to the kind of narrative content structures, right? We have our population tool, which relates to kind of overland mob population. This includes like how that pop paths and roams, where its attractors placed, what's the puzzles of these population areas. That pop tool is informed as a service by the event system. And the event system is what as you're describing, are random pop-up locations where certain objectives will be applied and public raids will be relevant for different types of reward tables that get spawned as a result of those public events. The event service informs the population service what to spawn as a result of that. We have our quest tooling, which obviously is in the format of buy orders, of commissions, of side quests, of story arcs. These systems are how our narrative designers introduce handheld content essentially within the game. These are the breadcrumbs that take you out to points of interest, that take you along the golden path to node structures, those types of things. The tools are in a relatively good state. There is a lot of kind of more customer focused quality of life changes that need to be applied to the tool sets, such as certain in-editor visualizers that make it a bit easier to understand how the implementation is going to be previewed when you do actually either package or cook the build. That is something that our tooling team is currently working on to provide our designers with the better ability for. There's also obviously native tools within Unreal that we like to utilize as much as possible that then interface on the back end with our tool structures that either slurp the data out of that or just allow designers who are familiar with Unreal 5 to use Unreal 5's native tools. We're taking a little bit of a move towards that direction, hopefully with the tools team as we continue to refine our internal tools as well. So I would say that from a production standpoint, when we talk about what is the position of the design team's ability to introduce content, right now it's pretty good and it's going to get a lot better pretty soon.
I'm going to ask just a little quickie follow-up on that. So I'm sure you remember the choose your own adventure thing that was done a few years back with the ruby they find in the bush and then they get attacked over it and all of that. Are we going to be seeing an event of that level during not just Alpha 1 Phase 1, or Alpha 2 Phase 1 rather, but anywhere in Alpha 2? Are we going to see something of that magnitude where a player obtains an item that has considerable world-changing effects to it, and what they do with it and who tries to take it from them and what they do with it will influence the servers and gameplay?
I would say that for content that is as influential as what you just described, expect that to come online in Phase 3.
Okay, cool.
Phase 1 is very much about stability and performance, right? This is, we are identifying a lot of bugs in our systems as it relates to scaling the testing up. That is normal. That is a absolutely normal and expected part of software development. And the focus of Phase 1 is that we get to have the players help us find those things. And then once those things are addressed, and once we have achieved the level of stability and performance that we want within Phase 1, then we are going to move into a higher focus on the types of gameplay experiences and content experiences starting in Phase 2 that you described, and in Phase 3, obviously.
Very cool.
So,
all right.
I wanted to follow up real quick. You've done some wonderful talks with Vladis and Yokai and Nice and No One. So we were trying to not repeat things. I do want to follow up on something that was mentioned in Vladis's. You talked a little bit about the Rogue, and I think that it won't be at the start of phase 2, but sometime not long after. Does that mean there's been a fair amount of the Rogue completed so far, or if you could give a percentage of where the Rogue is right now, as far as
there's been some prototyping on obviously the abilities for Rogue and Summoner, but I think the more important thing when we talk about what it takes to stand up an archetype, as Neurotoxin was talking about with regards to tool sets, a lot of the ability tool system, which is how we craft abilities for different archetypes, has a lot of mechanics and functionality that has to be developed first before design can get in and craft these particular ability types and prototype them and create them. So a lot of the work that goes into standing up these archetypes is already completed because of the tool that's used to make these abilities has a very wide arcing and expansive capability set. And so when it comes to prototyping certain abilities, designers can stand that up relatively quickly. What it takes to go from a prototyped ability to a rogue archetype is really all the stuff in between, which is refining animations, refining the visual effects for the abilities, getting in the audio, tuning the damage and stat values, and comprehensively balancing the ability progression. That is what hasn't yet gotten worked on. But all the concepting for the Rogue and the Summoner, some of the prototypes of the abilities, the tool that makes the abilities themselves has all the components that we need to do so. That's in place and ready to start running.
I'm curious about what took Rogue longer than, say, Fighter, because I thought Rogue was supposed to be in even for Alpha 1, even before we heard Fighter was going to be in.
So to give people kind of insight from a design perspective and development perspective, how this works is, the best teams are self-organizing, right? Obviously, this is a very agile principle. When teams talk about their prioritization of work to do, obviously you want to answer the hardest questions first, right? And because when you answer those questions, it can make the development down the stream a lot easier for the other archetypes and classes. So Rogue didn't really have as many difficult questions to answer as some of the other archetypes. And as a result, it got deprioritized when the team started to plan out their development. On the flip side of that, some archetypes have tech that wasn't stood up yet and serve as a blocker. Summoner was one of those because it required some inheritance of pet management and mount management that was tech being worked on by a separate team called our vehicles and mounts team. So the archetype team had to kind of wait to work on Summoner. Otherwise, we would have prioritized that sooner because it had a lot of hard questions to answer, more so than perhaps some of the other classes. But it was blocked by some of the work that was needing to be done on mounts and vehicles, which now through the caravan system and our mount system, as you can see in A2, we are addressing those issues and addressing those questions so that Summoner can be worked on as well.
Interesting. Very interesting. We had a lot of we had a lot of questions about the Summoner. Not to focus on that, but obviously people are just curious about the Rogue and the Summoner. Actually, I want to follow up. There was one question about the Summoner, and that it would have summons, obviously, for healer, tank, and DPS. There was a question about whether you all would think about doing a summons for support as well, now that that's sort of a important part of the party makeup.
Yeah, to be honest with you, I couple healing and support generally within the same tier. So it's DPS, it's tanking, and it's support / healing.
Gotcha.
Those would be the focuses of the summoner pets.
Very cool.
Diggs, you're being asked to save us. I'm not sure why, but do you have any questions?
I think it's just because my camera's frozen.
Oh,
I think you can still hear me.
It froze on a good spot though.
Yes. And I'm not going to do anything with the camera.
It wasn't like a weird face or anything. You look very tranquil and calm right now.
There you go. I think I'm not gonna do anything to try and jumpstart it because it'll probably mess up the other cameras. So as long as you guys can hear me and I'll
Yeah.
type, it's fine.
Sounds good. I had a question that I guess it didn't make it on the list, but it was approved. So I definitely do want to ask it here.
Oh,
And
it was
it's
approved. Did
regarding.
you have to get your questions approved?
Oh, did we not have to? Like, I'm pretty sure.
I absolve you of any approval process. You can ask me any question you'd like.
Oh, that's a
Well,
There you
problem.
go.
So the thing for me with the crafting system is, I guess I'm gonna ask the quick version before the long version. The quick version is, when do you expect the whole crafting system to go online?
Ooh, yeah, that is so you're talking about like up to level 50?
Not just up to level 50. Now, let me give you the long version for a little more context.
Okay.
So earlier on, in Alpha 1 and in some of the stuff we've seen before and in between, we saw a very dynamic and modular crafting system. You would build the components and you would put the components together to make the finished product. Even further, you had shown on one of the streams the experimentation system, where you can mix and match different metals and materials to get different results. Right now, we have like super primitive, like early WoW style, make 35 copper daggers so you can make a copper short sword. Not exactly like that. You can make all the tier 1 stuff before you can advance your trade skill, but it's all like just the basics. There's not really a lot of variation. There isn't really a lot of room for expression. There certainly isn't any room right now to like choose what metals I'm putting into the components or what wood I'm using. So the question is, when do you expect to see the whole of the crafting system and all of those features come online? If that's even the goal still, or if crafting has gotten more
It
simplified.
it is absolutely still the goal. That tech is actually still online and there.
Oh,
My
good.
expectation is that I would say within phase 2, you're going to see you're going to see a lot of evolution of the crafting systems coming online. There was probably some I'm not as familiar probably with what the cadence is for development on the econ team, because I know that there was some engineering work that was outstanding to facilitate a lot of what you just described. And I believe that over the next like 2 months, which is basically phase 2 that we're talking about, some of that tech's going to land, so that it is appropriately friendly with the other systems. So I would say look towards phase 2 for what you described. I know that there is still quality that's relevant towards individual processing and the components of the craftable end result that's present, and that system is just going to be expanded upon as development from the econ engineering side continues.
Yeah, we've got the if you have a certain tier of material for that recipe, you make the higher quality version. I don't know if they were joking around, if people actually were over enchanting and pushing their pieces to the point of failure, but
I saw
there's
that. I was logged into the test realm last weekend, and somebody PK'd me, and I chased them down, and I killed them, and they dropped a +9 necklace, and then they were like, "Oh, can I get my +9 necklace back?" And
I
I was
saw
like,
that.
"Finders keepers."
I saw that, and there was a server message you said saying, "I found a +9 necklace on the ground."
Yes,
Yes,
I put out
well done.
hey, they PK'd me and I was pissed. So on the broadcast, I was just like, did anybody lose a +9 necklace? I found this on the ground.
You owe me a
Well
1v1,
done.
by the way.
Oh no.
You do. It took so much crap about being killed by you. So eventually one day. Actually, I was kind of curious now that you mentioned playing, whether you would have the White Order actually anytime soon up
Which
and
one?
running.
Say that again.
Your old guild.
Oh, the White Order.
The White Order.
Oh, no,
Whether
no, no. I resigned from that, and that is now in the very capable hands of a good friend. And yes, I do believe they have plans, but I think it was like 7 years ago I resigned from that guild, even though I started it when I was 17 years old and built it to some 20 some odd thousand members. It was not something that I could in good faith continue to be a leader of or a part of, while also making this game.
Still good to know we can hopefully see you and during testing. Everyone can kind of run by. And do you hide behind I guess you use your regular name, I would assume, right?
I would probably kill them more than other guilds, I would imagine, in a game, but we'll see.
Just
Gosh,
for funsies.
my head is spinning now that we don't have to have anything approved. I'm trying to think back to what I deleted off our list here.
So I wanted to talk about the queuing system just a little bit real quick.
Yeah.
If I remember correctly, the way the queuing system works is once there's a threshold of players that have entered the Lionhold Aelin Ruins area, the queue is kind of locked until people start leaving that area. How big is that area? Is it basically just from the portal to the end of the Sickly Goblins? Or is it all the way through the Aelin Ruins region, and that the queue won't advance until people get their mounts and get tough enough that they feel like they can leave and not die when they get out of the area?
So first thing I would say is that let's separate out the conversation about queuing versus like server load. So queuing as a system is informed by an aggregation of population across all the servers, as well as the server load for the starting server. Now, that is intended to be coupled with some performance mitigation optimizations that some have landed and some have yet to land that we are still working on, which relates to how we dynamically bring in the network calling distance, how we dynamically adjust the net relevancy distances. All of those things go towards mitigating like server performance issues on the starting server. And we have some other long-term plans to help address that as well for the starting zone itself. The current queuing system, as I said, takes into account all of the realms, or excuse me, all of the server workers on a realm, as well as the starting server. That starting server, that district grid right now is relatively the starting temple, and that starting area just outside of it. And then Lionhold is on a completely separate worker. So even if players, move out of the starting temple and into Lionhold, they're now on a separate worker, but it still contributes to informing the queue and how people get trickled in, because again, we take into account all the workers' populations. And we even weight the relevancy of that worker population based on proximity to the starting worker. So that is also relevant.
Gotcha. Okay, so there are a lot of moving parts to it. It isn't as cut and dry as get in the world, do sweat of your brow, get on that mountain, get the hell out of there so the next person can come in. It's not quite like that.
No, I mean, and we've seen over the course of multiple weekend testings where, obviously we heat map player movement and progression through the world. A lot of player progression stays relatively sticky to the center of the Riverlands. And we know that that's in part because a lot of the initial content is more dense in those locations, and the leveling experience and time to level keeps those locations more relevant. So part of what we've been doing on the world design side of things over the last few weeks has been to introduce safe corridors or safe paths that lead out to the node locations to better alleviate the network constraints that exist within the density of the Central's Riverlands, so that we can ferry players out of that zone a little bit quicker.
Yeah,
and that to a degree is in combination, right? That's like design driven for a technical issue that we're trying to address.
That is good because most of my experience, because I've been playing solo because I don't want to bog down a group with my intricate bug reports. But when and I have a lot of them, what would happen is I'd start trying to go to a different zone, and it would just be a bad time. I felt like if I'm not level 10 before I leave the Aelan Ruins, I'm just looking for trouble. Especially on the road to Jova, where there's that one respawn point with the 4 1-star mushrooms just literally hanging out right there, waiting to re-gank you after they catch you on the path.
That's so
So
great.
yeah, that'll be nice to see at least a little bit of relief, so players who are under level 10 can actually go and spread out throughout the world instead of feeling like, oh, we stay in this little place until we can maybe kind of tough it out a little bit more and kill like a level 11 bear by ourselves or something. And then also the gearing up part that like I've basically given up on the trade stuff because the enemies just drop better stuff than trying
Right.
to do the trade
Well,
route.
I think the other important thing to keep in mind is that again, phase one's focuses on stability and performance.
Mhm.
And so what happens is that when we have the design teams that are working on what I just described, which is creating those safe corridors out of Lionhold and out of the center of the Riverlands, that content adjustment takes a back seat to obviously stability and performance issues.
Right.
So I wouldn't expect that we're going to fully address this issue from a design perspective until probably sometime end of November-ish timeframe.
Okay, that makes sense. Cool, cool.
I wanted to ask. So when it comes, something we've not really heard a lot about is the Underrealm. I think that was something that was not, if I'm remembering correct, not on any of the slides, the roadmap slides. Has there been any work done with the Underrealm yet?
The Underrealm, from a content perspective, as we saw in Alpha 1, there's a lot of assets that we made that are Underrealm, bioluminescent foliage and vegetation. We have our post-process effects that we apply towards the Underrealm. What we're waiting on from a tech perspective on the Underrealm is, we have our server gridding, which exists on a plane across the world. We need to separate that and have separate server grids for the Underrealm as well. And there's some tech that's required, additional tech development that's required on the networking side in order to facilitate that. You also notice that in the starting city, that there is a whole undersection of the starting city that you can jump off of. Well, we block the ability to jump off of, but the intent there is that that would exist on a separate server worker as well, so as not to bog down the introductory locations, and that we can funnel players back to those locations, and we're not doubling down on player density within these, starting areas, so to speak. Underrealm is likely going to be landing near the either. We're probably going to start introducing Underrealm, I would say, at the beginning-ish of phase 3.
Okay.
Okay.
And so what that means is on the environment side, essentially, and on the design side, environment's going to go in and start carving out locations. Some of it already is a little bit carved out. They're just not accessible right now under the Riverlands world. But they're in the beginning of phase 3. We're likely going to go down there and start opening up the Underrealm caverns and spaces between the connections to the zones like the Sandsquall Desert and the tropics out of the Riverlands. And then design will go in and start populating.
You mentioned the servers. So is dynamic gridding going to be in Friday, or if not, will it be in by phase? Will it be in by phase 2?
It will absolutely be in by phase 2, but it will likely not be online the first weekend or probably even the second weekend. And that's because those teams have been very, very focused on the current bugs that we have available to us. So we had to take engineers off of working on the dynamic gridding solution, which still has some outstanding testing and bugs that are necessary, but is functional on a lower branch under our dev environment, but hasn't been integrated up into the build process yet. And then once we have the ability to go back to that and start testing, then we'll do the integration into our dev.
Gotcha.
Also, good segue into the PvP free areas.
Oh yeah. So we were talking. We had sort of had this. Well, I think it's always been said. Really, your only PvP free areas would be inside your house on the freehold, and your player stalls. But you mentioned talking to Vladis that you have now introduced some limited PvP areas or areas that might be free. And we were just sort of curious what changed your mind on this, why there was sort of a decision to allow some areas to have sort of PvP light interactions.
Part of that has to do with the current state of our guard deterrence, and fine tuning that. Also, some of that has to do with we don't have a cumulative corruption PK tracker, which is supposed to augment the amount of corruption you gain on cumulative PKs. So right now, what's happening is we have a lot of players that are just going red on other players, killing themselves, making sure they're not losing their gear as a result of that, having a friend nearby, and then they can go kill another person right after and just do recycle, repeat, right?
Yeah.
And so in order for that to actually have sting, we need to keep a cumulative value on the corruption occurrences, right? So if I kill, you once and then I lose my corruption and I come back and kill you a second time, I'm gaining more base corruption as a result of that cumulative value. And so that acts as a deterrent for me because eventually, if I kill 10, 20 people, this character now is going to be real painful for me to kill one person again in the future. And that's going to deter me from doing it.
Yeah.
So, in order to help alleviate that, what we have done is we've taken our PvP zone tech, which is applied to the lawless territories. We've created the inverse of that and created this PvP suppression zones, and we'll be applying that to certain locations temporarily until the long-term intended system goals of PKing, corruption, and flagging come online to do the proper deterrence.
Yeah, I want to mention to those watching corruption, because I know PvE players get a little bit concerned about this. Corruption, I think, feels very good. I think last Sunday you were talking with Yokai and NDA, and they were talking about how it's very punishing, and they thought it was in a good place there. The patch notes, I'll just read off. Can I do that? Can I read the patch notes about corruption?
Go ahead. Yeah, you can read the patch notes. Yeah.
So this was after the Yokai interview, and this was the entry on corruption. So this week's patch, there was increased corruption gain rate, greatly increased corruption dampening penalties, and greatly increased guard movement speed. So that's even been improved or increased upon since you talked to Yokai. So I thought I'd mention that, so I was worried.
So I went over to Design Bucky last week, and I reauthored some of his charts on corruption values on the minimum drop of equipped items for corruption score, on the maximum drop instances. We increased base movement speed of all guard types. We mix and match now range and melee guards as well because there were some pathing issues. We've also increased the base power of guards to level 50 so that they can't be trained. We increased the perception radius of guards from 30 meters to 50 meters as well, so that they have a broader degree of awareness. And then we also added additional population and pathing that's going to be in the A2 also.
Gotcha. I know we're getting close to our time, and I know you two probably have some more questions asked. There's one I wanted to ask real quick, just because some other folks had talked with me about it. We've had a couple of shows about this, and I think you mentioned in one of the previous interviews, just people talk a lot about time, how long it's taken and being 7-8 years in.
Right.
So one of our discussions that we have had is, and I'm not talking from a system standpoint. We obviously would want to see Ashes released with all of its core systems in place. But from a content perspective, when you start looking at years in development, would you ever consider changing sort of your release criteria? So what I mean by that is, would you ever release with one continent, no Underrealm, no Tolnar, and add those things later, or something similar? Or is this sort of an all or nothing release?
Well, no. I mean, when you ask the question as, would I ever? I think the answer is obviously going to be yes. I think that question is more informed by, as we move through Alpha 2 and we see the state of the game improve and we land the content that players are enjoying and that accompany them as part of this dynamic approach to the world development, like all of those things play into a decision. about what content we're waiting on before we have an official release. Now we have our intended content goals, and right now, in my opinion, those intended content goals are all very deliverable. Depending on how we make progress in Alpha 2 towards shoring up the stability and performance of these systems, and ensuring that the tools necessary to go into production are as refined and user-friendly as possible for the development team. When those things are done, it should be a relatively quick road for us to implement content. And also implementing that content is something that is very scalable by leveraging external development teams to assist us in the creation of monsters, gear, buildings, effects, sound, all of that stuff that goes into making content is something that is very exportable to external development teams. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with the industry, like that is a standard and necessary way that you can build a sustainable internal team that you then don't have to lay off once you've shipped all the mass content in the time frame you've wanted to. You leverage those external teams to increase your capacity, to flex your ability to develop, because there are a lot of external art houses that are very good at making content. And if the internal team has strong pipelines that are accompanying these development processes, those should be easy things to farm out with the appropriate external managers on our team, right? So the goal here is that we land the stability, we land the performance, we land the core loop viability. And then when those things are landed and the tools feel good, we start onboarding external teams to ramp up the content development.
Yeah, gotcha. Yeah, that kind of came out of, we just noticed on the roadmap, again, with the phase 1, 2, 3 planning, that there were some things that were just missing, like the Underrealm, I think social organizations. Right. They mentioned religion was mentioned, but other social organizations weren't. Stocks exchange, several of the zones. I think it only listed augments for cleric and tanks. So we didn't know if that was just not necessarily an oversight or if there was potentially a plan to do those things later on, like I just mentioned. But
yeah.
Now, I know we've gotten...
just to be clear real quick, a lot of times those things that you mentioned are oversights that there's a lot to track. And obviously, while community engagement is very important to us, as we've demonstrated through the last 7 or 8 years of constant development updates and interaction with the community, we are not in marketing mode, meaning we don't spend dollars on advertising, on getting streamers to play the game, on evangelizing the product. What we do is we have a very good community team and marketing team internally that accompany our development process and show it to our core audience. And if that gets picked up beyond our core audience, then great, we have additional visibility. But it's not a focus of ours right now. So as a result of that, you are going to see some things like spelling errors, like missed content that we didn't talk about that is still planned and is in our JIRA and in our project management and in our backlog on the development team, but perhaps got missed by our community team when creating assets to talk with the audience about. So these venues are perfect for asking questions as follow-ups, right? This is why I do these types of interviews, is because it provides you guys who are closest to the community, because you're in the community, right, the ability to ask those types of questions, but a little bit of understanding on the side of the player base to know that we are not in marketing mode right now. We are in development mode, and marketing accompanies that. It isn't driven by that.
Gotcha. Well, we are basically, do you have another 5 minutes or?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. I think each of us want to ask one final kind of quick question.
Yeah, and obviously you can keep this one as quick as you want. We've been wondering actually about the plan for future Unreal updates. What the sort of pacing for updates and plans? I know 6 has already been announced and is on the horizon. What is it that you folks are planning to do in terms of doing updates to the Unreal Engine as you go forward here?
Sure. For for your audience who's perhaps less familiar with development and what updates mean, versioning wise with Unreal Engine. There's a lot that it kind of depends on the update, right? What's in the update. We have our internal teams that evaluate, what upgrading looks like for us, and that's something that can be very intensive for some of our engineering teams to overcome, depending on the version we're talking about. The things that are most intensive sometimes, or any times they change, iris code or anything that's network related, that can have a large reverberating effect across the game systems. And when we want to pay that debt, we have to be very careful and specific about the time we choose to pay that, because it can introduce essentially a halt to our release cadence of the game. Right now is not the time to do an update. Because we are very much in the thick of stabilizing the game right now from an Alpha 2 perspective. Now, once we've achieved that, which is going to be essentially phase 1, it's likely that you will start seeing us do updates internally with Unreal in phase 2. But we have to get through all the Sev 0, Sev 1 bugs first before we can start entertaining that chance. Now, that doesn't mean that we can't grab things off of Unreal's future versions and cherry pick them back to us. We do that quite often, right? If there are specific things that get released with a future version, so long as there aren't, integrated dependencies with that version that we can't pull back, generally we will grab individual things and we'll pull them back for us to use. But that's a relatively atomic process.
Yeah, you can literally hack the code to the lowest level with the engine, with the license level you folks are at. So it makes sense that you don't have to version upgrade if the things in the version upgrades are compartmentalized and brought over, and you can just utilize them one for one. It's not like Epic Games is like, hey, you can't do that. I'm sure they'd be happy to see that you're doing it.
Yeah. And I see Rockwell said, no more updates to Unreal Engine, please. So just to be clear, what we're talking about is updates within UE5. We're not talking about a version update of Unreal 4 to 5. That's a massive change, right? That we went through once. I do not foresee that our game is going to be seeing a upgrade out of Unreal 5, right? That's not on the horizon. However, within Unreal 5, there are different versions that get released that update existing systems, that introduce new tech, that solve old issues, that address bugs, instability within Unreal. Like, those are things that we constantly are upgrading with along the way. They're much less intensive than a UE4 to UE5 update, to give you guys context in the audience who may be unfamiliar with development.
Diggs, you got one?
Yes, my question is about backgrounds and racial augments. Are backgrounds replacing racial augments? What's the idea behind backgrounds and how that's going to affect racial abilities?
Racial augments are different than backgrounds. So racial augments, when we get into augmentation, racial augments will be an additional flavor that will influence, the obviously abilities data, which could be, cooldown, mana, damage. It could, in some cases, be even very instrumental in the ability itself and how it interacts. Those will get applied as an augment. Backgrounds are essentially at character creation. You are choosing the background of your character that might give you some influences as passive abilities, that might give you, mainly it's going to be focused around passive abilities and perhaps even title structures that will matter for narrative reasons as well. So that's the intent behind backgrounds. Is this something you choose at character creation? It'll influence narrative structures and give you some passive actions.
So how does that relate to racial progression in general, like as applied to
These
metros that have?
backgrounds, yeah, these backgrounds aren't racial. So what we didn't want to do was create a specific race because of its access to one of these backgrounds that then is the go-to mage or race or the go-to cleric race or whatever, right? What we wanted to do is we wanted to have an agnostic background system that you can choose as part of any race. So if you're a street rat background as a Kalar or as a Valoon, it's the same street rat background across the races. And now you have, a 5% luck bonus to find additional glint on a mob. Or, you have a narrative structure that engages you as a predicate for the street rat arc that has, a different type of itemization loop. Those are things that just add flavor to your character and influence the gameplay to some degree, but doesn't carve out these kind of pigeonholes that players have to do as a meta.
Yeah, I guess I'm wondering how racial progression, if that's still a thing, as related to which race dominates a metro or a city, and how those two things interact, if they do at all. Like
The backgrounds.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, you're good.
No, like a reason for racial progression, right? Like if I would imagine that if I don't have a metro with my race, it would be harder to complete racial progression, but I don't know if that's a thing. That's kind of what I'm asking there.
No, I don't.
Maybe
I
it
don't
doesn't
think
matter.
so. I think that the cultural influence over a node serves as one of our types of predicates, right? So when we talk about dynamic content, when we talk about world spawners changing based off of these things, like narrative structures changing based off of that, story arcs changing based off of that, those all get informed by this predicate of cultural influence. Cultural influence is determined by racial contribution toward node development, which we saw in Alpha 1 and is present in Alpha 2, but doesn't have the associated assets yet fully stood up to visualize that within the node itself. That will come online later in Alpha 2. But yes, it's still racial progression still serves as a very important piece of the predicate system, which influences our narrative structures.
Great, thanks.
All right. One real quick one. Just because I'm always curious about this, and then we're done. Obviously, especially with your background with Arcage and Lineage 2, many of the games that have sort of described as spiritual successors to Ashes of Creation, have been releasing a lot of sequels. And when you look at Arcage 2, Chronicles, Ion 2, TNL, there's a big focus on PvE that I think did not exist before, and less on PvP. I was just curious if you have a reason, a thought, an opinion as to why that might be, that these games have sort of shifted a little bit.
I think that there is a wide space of identity within this genre. I think that the MMORPG genre is a large one with a lot of divergent opinions and subjective approaches to what gameplay is compelling. Those games that focus on PvE, the games that focus on PvP, the games that are PvX, the games that are spreadsheet simulator, there's a wide array of interested audiences. I think what's important for a developer is to focus on the identity you want to have and not to try to have every identity possible, right? Because when you do that, you get to service a core audience. And servicing a core audience is a strong metric of success, meaning that you can't appeal to everyone. And the games that are choosing to double down on the PvE content, there's a large PvE crowd of players out there that just want to have PvE content. And they're going to succeed with those groups. And I wish them the best. And I hope that they do a great job in delivering the promise of a strong central PvE focused MMORPG, because, that just makes the genre better. But for Ashes, we are a PvX game. We are focused on PvX. And we have been completely unabashed about that approach throughout the development history. We have been upfront and personal about what PvX means, so that when we are speaking to our audience knows who they are and whether or not that's something that interests them.
Yeah.
I would say you were not upfront about that in the beginning, but
Unbelievable. I would strongly disagree with you.
He
well,
says
you added
that
the
with 1
open
minute
seas.
left.
You added the open seas after you said that was not going to exist. So in our first interview,
Open seas adhere to our philosophy of PVX. Like they really do. And it is an opt-in. There is not any progression blocking experience that requires a player who doesn't want to have open sea experiences from having to go into the open sea. They can acquire what comes from the open sea through the economy system, and they can stay completely out of the open sea if they choose to. Right. So essentially, the open seas are an opt-in content loop. Right. So, in my opinion,
I
yes.
disagree, but we're not going to argue it now. It's okay.
Yeah,
It's okay.
we are.
It's okay.
Yeah,
It's okay.
I know you have a hard stuff you got to go. So we can wrap it up here. I feel bad that we wanted to talk about aliens, but these things go so fast.
Oh, right.
I feel like
I feel like if I talk
That's
about
why
aliens
Steven
too
is
much,
leaving.
I'm gonna be the cuckoo guy. I'm gonna be the crazy guy who's talking about aliens. Although I feel like it's shifting a little bit, but we are living in interesting times.
Yes.
I will tell you that.
Yeah,
Between the wars in the world, the politics in America, the alien shit that's going on, every day I wake up and I think, are we living in a simulation?
Yeah, I know, right?
Is this really the MMO genre to its logical extension 500 years from today?
But I feel bad because I feel like all of us we get to talk to you and we don't actually talk to you. We talk about the game, and there's much more to you than the game. So I feel bad, but so apologies there. I was wanting to ask you about Magic the Gathering, but perhaps another time. So just to kind of wrap up, I think I want my feedback to you. The classes feel really good right now. So for everyone listening, we're breaking NDA here. I've played almost unexclusively the fighter, which blows my mind because all I've ever done is cleric and bard. Everything feels really good. The death penalty also feels really good. Drop-in material sucks. The EXP debt you almost don't notice. So, but that's the last thing I will say. So do you have anything to say to the folks?
No, just testers. You guys are doing a great job. Can't wait to get more people in on the 25th. Please be understanding as we work through the kinks that adding on these additional players is going to introduce. The team is working hard right now. Obviously, we're going to be with the community every step of the way, engaging as much as we can. But fill out those bug reports. We're excited to have you guys. And I do believe that tomorrow, I will ask the community team to provide an announcement to the testers that we will be releasing the verbal NDA on testing thus far. So tomorrow, stand by for that communication, and people can go out and they can chat with others about what they've experienced within our testing apparatus.
Sweet. Very awesome to hear. Your bug testing tools are also really great for reporting, by the way. So
awesome. Good.
Well, all right. You got to run. So we're going to wrap up. Hopefully we'll get to do this again a little bit after A2 gets going and check in with you. So we appreciate your time.
Absolutely. Loved it, guys. Always, as always.
Thanks.
All right, everybody. We are live real quick.
Cheers.
We are live every Sunday, 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern, this channel. So if you just followed us, please join us. Thank you very much. I will post this on YouTube as a little bit better version later tonight with some chapters. So I know you got to run, Steven. I keep saying that. And you actually do have to run. So we will end here. And thank you very much.
Bye, guys.
See you.
Yeah.